Hello and a very warm welcome. Cuba has announced plans to lay off huge numbers of state employees in the biggest shift to the private sector since the revolution in 1959. The Cuban Labour Federation says more than 1 million workers would lose their jobs, half of them by March next year. Well, President Raúl Castro has said he wants to reduce the role of the state to tackle a deep crisis in Cuba's socialist economy. Well, the BBC's Andy Gallagher is in Miami and he gave me more details about the scale of the cuts.
Well, they had tried this back in the 90s when the Soviet Union ran out of money, but I think this is quite different, not just economically, but I also think psychologically. Remember, the communist government of Cuba runs just about everything. About 95% of all the people there working government jobs. In years past, if you were out of one job and were waiting to go into another one, the government would still pay you more than half your wages. So this is a huge shift. 500,000 at least by March will be laid off. They are then expected to either go and work for themselves because the Communist Party there will loosen up its laws about private enterprise. They will issue licenses for people who own small businesses. But the big question, I think, here is where is that private sector to absorb all these workers at the moment? Raúl Castro has been experimenting by giving licenses to people like taxi drivers and people like hairdressers, but that's a small change, really, when you think about the sheer number of workers here who are going to be laid off. 500,000 at least by March, and perhaps all in 1 million.
The former leader Fidel Castro was, of course, recently quoted as saying that the Cuban model doesn't even seem to work for them anymore. What did he mean by that?
Well, he said he meant it not literally and actually meant it as a joke. But I think that the fact is that the Cuban economy has been suffering a great deal over the past couple of years. Tourism is down. One of their main exports, nickel, the price has fallen there. So they are in a lot of trouble, and I think this is a shot of reality. So, certainly since Raúl Castro has come into power since 2006, he's hinted at these kinds of changes, but I don't think anyone was expecting anything quite on this scale. It is huge. It's huge economically, huge psychologically, but it's implementing it that will be the problem. The private sector isn't there. There's a huge black market in Cuba where people work illegally and try and earn dollars. And even if you do work for the government, the average salary is something like $20 a month. So these are huge seismic changes, which I think will be very difficult to implement. And meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of people will lose their jobs.
That was Andy Gallagher in Miami. Well, joining me now from Washington is Tomas Bilbao. He's with the Cuba Study Group, which describes itself as a non-partisan organisation that calls for a free and prosperous Cuba. Tomas, thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News. What do you make of this? Is Cuba about to ditch its communist roots?
Well, I think that we have to expect that these reforms are going to take place in a calibrated manner. So we shouldn't expect that overnight Cuba's economic system is going to change, but it is an important recognition that Cuba's model has failed. Cuba's economy is in the worst condition that it's been in 50 years. And although the announcement today is important in that it shifts a lot of the burden away from the government and into the private sector, as your segment said earlier on, just moving these people into a position to be able to work for themselves doesn't solve the problem in and of itself. Cuba will have to back this up with further and more important reforms if it's going to have any effect in rescuing Cuba's economy.
Indeed, and on that point, what exactly does Cuba need to do to encourage that private sector? Because if there are 500,000 or so people laid off and there isn't private sector jobs for them, what are they going to do?
Well, I think that the thing that the Cuban leaders need to realize is that they need to provide these workers who are now being laid off and who will be giving licenses to work for themselves with an atmosphere in which they can grow, not just work for themselves, but hire other Cubans in their businesses, have access to credit so that they can make capital investments that they need in order for manufacturing or for expanding agricultural production, and that they'll be able to sell the markets, the products on an open market at market value. Otherwise, all they've done is shift the unproductive employment in the public sector to an unproductive private sector.
But presumably, if these people do set up their own business at some point in the future, they could make a whole lot more money than they have been in the past.
Oh, there's no doubt about that, especially those who are close to tourist areas or who have access to tourists who have hard currency. The average wage of a Cuban worker that works for the government is approximately $20 a month. And if you keep in mind that tourists frequently can tip $1 or $2, or they can, or Cubans will be able to sell artisan products and other services to tourists, then that can have a big impact. But the point is that we can't. The Cuban leaders can't expect that the tourist sector alone will provide the market for all the products for 500,000 people. They need to be able to expand it to address manufacturing, agriculture, and other services that go beyond just tourism.
And just briefly, if you can, Tomas, presumably people's lives, the ordinary Cuban's life, will change dramatically.
For those who are fortunate enough to be able to have access to capital from abroad, mainly, those who have family abroad and can have access to the capital they need to start their business or to the products they need to start their business will. Unfortunately, for many more who don't have that access, who don't have family living abroad, these reforms at the limited way that they were announced today will have little impact, and ultimately little impact on the Cuban economy. And that's why it's important that Cuban leaders open up to microloans, for example, from overseas, or capital investments in small enterprises, so that Cuban entrepreneurs can get access to the resources and the know-how that they need to succeed.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. But Tomas Bilbao from the Cuba Study Group, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.